The BBC bias against Brexiteers and Conservatives continue, and now we have a number of Tory MPs coming out to expose this bias and how ridiculous the BBC have been. In the Express, we have a report talking about Bernard Jenkins, a Conservative MP, the Brexiteer, who has now talked about how, especially during the referendum, the people who work for the BBC, the researchers, the producers, and sometimes the presenters, have been extremely biased against the Brexit side. So the Express says that during the debate on Brexit, the Tory MP Bernard Jenkins criticised the language used by the BBC's Gary Robertson. He was referring to Mr Jenkins speaking to Good Morning Scotland when Robertson said, "You talk about crashing out without a deal, if that's what it takes." Obviously, Bernard denied using that language and said that leaving Brussels without a trade deal would not be disastrous. So on this show, we actually have another Conservative MP as a special guest. We have Ben Bradley, one of the most sound Conservative MPs, who's an ordinary working class lad. He loves his football. He's very sound in terms of his views on obviously Brexit, conservatism, and he's very involved with the blue collar Conservative movement. And he's also not woke. So let's go to Ben Bradley and see what he has to say. So now we're joined by Ben Bradley, one of the most sound Tory MPs that we have currently. Welcome to the show, Ben. How are you?
Not too bad, Maya. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Surviving. How's the lockdown treating you? Well, post-lockdown now.
All right. I enjoyed it, actually. It was nice to work from home, see my children, remind them what I look like. But I'm glad to get back down to Westminster a bit and be able to actually talk through this stuff. It's amazing. You don't realise how difficult it is to follow from the outside world without being there.
No, you're right. I think, things have slightly changed, obviously. There's a lot going on right now, and we thought because of the whole lockdown stuff, nothing will happen. But actually, there's a lot happening. So you have so we just had in the Express your colleague, Bernard Jenkins, actually criticising the BBC. He actually kind of exposed how during the referendum, when he was doing interviews, he experienced some clear bias from the people who work there, not necessarily just the presenters, but the researchers. Have you experienced anything ever since you've been an MP? Experienced any kind of edgy sort of things from the BBC?
Not directly at me or things that I've been involved in, I don't think, but I do kind of agree with Bernard that sometimes the inadvertent or kind of institutional bias when everybody seems to have the same point of view, you know what I mean, within the organisation. You go around the building at the BBC at Millbank or whatever, and a lot of people with similar backgrounds, similar worldviews. There's not a lot of variety there, and it seems like sometimes there's this imbalance just in wording that you don't necessarily notice. I always thought through the referendum, this idea that we talked about crash out, no deal Brexit, which in itself is an incredibly biased term. Like it obviously paints a picture about what Brexit will be like that's very much contested, but seemed to be the norm in terms of media speak. And we've seen it with these protests and stuff in recent weeks as well, where Black Lives Matter protest in London is people fighting against discrimination, and then other protests have been activists taking health risks in a pandemic, and the difference between the two is pretty obvious, actually.
Yeah, the coverage has been interesting. Yeah, because they with the first one, obviously, when the BLM came out, the phrasing was peaceful protest, peaceful march, and the day before the counter protest was supposed to be happening, before it actually had happened, they already made up their mind and labeled every single person, saying these are hard right and they're coming out, and so I mean, obviously there are people from both sides, and any argument that could do certain things and say certain things, but the majority, if you don't know who they are before the actual march, you can't decide for the public, right?
Absolutely, I think on both sides, right? The BLM stuff and the march that took place, in theory to defend statues and what have you the following week. I think the vast majority of people there were there for perfectly legitimate reasons, although I question the logic on both sides of mass rally in the middle of a pandemic. But it's always the minority that get the stick, but they often seem keen to avoid talking about it on one side and more keen to highlight it on the other, shall we say.
Yeah, what is your view on all these movements going around? How woke are you?
I don't think I'm particularly woke. I don't think there's
working class to be woke.
I think it's incredibly frustrating because I put a big Twitter thread on the other night comparing it all to 1984 and this kind of groupthink where you either go along with it or you're going to be a target. And you've seen it with things like the Premier League and whatever this week, or they're saying no player is forced to take a knee, no player is forced to have Black Lives Matter on their shirt. But can you imagine being the one player who decided not to? I can't imagine for a second that every single one of them agrees with
No.
the political stance of that movement. So it's really difficult times, and I think I've been kind of calling and trying to push colleagues and government and other people in institutions to kind of step up and say that, because I think we're guilty sometimes of just going along with stuff and not really shouting up about it.
Yeah, you're right. I think we have heard some rumors that the government might finally take a stance against it, against the whole mentality, the whole mob mentality. Because you're right, it's not just the Premier League. I was playing FIFA on my PlayStation the other day, and they changed all the names to like they couldn't tell who the players were anymore.
That was the most annoying thing. I was watching the Villa Sheffield United game, and saying, "Who's that? I've not seen him before." I can't tell because
Yeah.
they've all got the same name, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Gary Lineker got a load of abuse for joking about that as well. Madness.
I know, but
Yeah,
that's
I hope that they will. And conversations I've had, I think they are looking at how do we really step up and try and deal with this, because clearly it can't drag on. The challenge you find in government is that actually a lot of obviously businesses, people like the Premier League, people like what goes on in London with Sadiq, we're not actually in control of it.
That's true. Yeah, there's because you mentioned the whole 1984 stuff. Historically, and even with stories, it was usually the government or the state becoming authoritarian. But now we're getting to a point where it's not necessarily the government or the state. It's actually on a societal level. All these groups try to kind of tell people what to do, and they're now forcing capitalist companies to go ahead with their Marxist ideology. And ironically, if they ever take control, the first people that come after is the same like Premier League and Netflix and all these guys.
Absolutely, and be careful what you wish for. And I mean, I've seen a lot of polling in the last few weeks about people's views of companies that they normally go and spend their money with, and what they think about those companies when they express a political view. People don't want to hear it. Nobody cares what Ben and Jerry's stance on society is. I just, I do like the ice cream. Probably won't buy it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's right, because same thing happened to Gillette a year ago. Same thing happened with right now. There was an opinion poll about the statues. Only 13% of the public agreed that we should bring down the statues. People just, they're too concerned about their own everyday lives, having a job, having a family, and with everything going on. This is not a priority, guys.
Yeah, I think for most people, and this is part of the problem, isn't it? I've always felt that typical perhaps conservative with the small C voter cracking on and trying to sort their life out, but look after their family, has got bigger fish to fry than fighting about statues in Bristol. So we just get on with it, and we just kind of get on with our lives. And it seems sometimes like the kind of far left and the regular protesters, the regular people who are out there at every protest on every issue, are the ones who've got the time and energy to take this stuff on. And it's incumbent on us, I think, in the government to step up and make that case and to be tough on it.
Yeah, speaking of actual priorities, we're still going through the Brexit talks. Things seems to be going quite well. David Frost has been very strong. The whole team have been very good. How do you think it's going from what you hear in Parliament and from what you get from the government? Are they eventually going to cave in, or are they actually still going to go strong and get a good deal or whatever?
Or whatever, yeah. I think it seems to be okay. Very different approach with this government than the previous one, as you can imagine. And I think, as you say, David Frost has been pretty tough and laid out publicly our expectations and where we think we need to be. We're not going to accept anything that doesn't actually deliver the positives from Brexit and being tied to the rules and all the rest of it. So, I don't see government bending on that. There'll be a point at some time in the autumn where some compromise is offered, and we'll have to consider that and see which side of the line we fall on. But from my constituency, 71% leave anyway in the first place. I think we're ready to crack on and get over the line. I'm of the view that if we can't agree it in this 12 months or the previous 3 years, then we're not going to agree it, are we? So no point delaying from my perspective, and I hope the government's on board with that.
Yeah, the funny thing that I heard was again recently that because we're crashing out apparently. There's not enough time. We've had literally 4 years. I don't understand. It's not.
Yeah, we've discussed it quite a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, I think people are just sick and tired of it. So I don't know. It's quite difficult. So hopefully we'll see how everything goes. And I mean, are you kind of now adapting to the new normal, especially with your job in Parliament? So is it difficult, kind of with the whole voting stuff, with the whole virtual stuff? Or I mean, that's going to finish.
It's a challenge to try and figure out. Because as you say, there's a lot happening in terms of changes, and some good stuff in the last few weeks around, defeating the Foreign Office and all these structural change things I'm really supportive of. But it's hard to follow the detail, and particularly legislation, when actually a lot of that would come from interaction with colleagues, right? You'd be sat in the tea room and you'd go, oh, what about this bill that's coming this week? And you'd talk through some of the dodgy bits and things you might want to change and what you might want to say. So it's quite a challenge to keep up without all of that. Corridors are pretty empty because people are confined to their offices while we're down there. So hopefully it comes back. I think it's not great for democracy when you can't have these kind of internal discussions and really get to grips with what's going on.
No, you're right. Lastly, are you looking forward to going back to the pub?
Yes, God, let's hope they open soon. It's a challenge, shall we say. I'm a sports nut anyway, so my big thing is getting back out on the football pitch, on a hockey pitch, and doing that. But for most of us, social activity revolves around a pint, doesn't it? So it'll be a big step forward for mental health, I think, when the pubs open.
No, you're right. Well, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully, I'll see you soon in Westminster, one of the pubs anyway. But thanks again for coming on the show. Any last few words?
No worries, mate. I'll see you soon, and hopefully, we'll be able to sit inside in a slightly smaller, socially distanced way, and the pubs will be booming.
Brilliant. Thanks again. See you soon.
All right. See you soon.